What happened at White Lake this weekend may have been more than an uncontrolled outpouring of hip young people, struggling as they did to survive. First, the 20-mile traffic jams and 5-mile hikes, then the intense heat and sudden rain, the thirst and hunger from the shortage of water and food, just for the opportunity to spend a few days in the country getting stoned on their drugs and grooving on the music.
There's 100 million songs going to be sung tonight. All of them are going to be singing about the same thing, which I hope everybody who came to hear, really. And it's all about you, actually, and me and everybody around the stage and everybody that hasn't gotten here, and the people who are going to read about you tomorrow. Yes. And how really groovy you were.
So there we are, we have a stage, we have microphones, we have a sound system, but we don't have any performers. Every now and then we'd spot one. And someone would go off and round this guy up and he'd come up on stage. That's how Richie showed, that's how Richie played. Richie was supposed to play in the evening.
I knew for a fact immediately Tim Hardin wasn't going on first, period, And I was supposed to be fifth on the bill. It dawned on me that there wasn't anybody else there to go on but me. And they started to come at me, like, Richie, would you go on? I'm saying to myself, oh no, this thing is about 2 hours and 50 minutes late and people are gonna throw beer cans at me and I'm freaking out, So all of a sudden, and then Michael's there, please, Richie, please, So I went up on the stage and the minute I got up there, I knew that it was okay because they wanted something to happen, period, you know what I mean? And it was wonderful to start off and do the set, and 2 hours and something later, I start walking off the stage. And they go, go back, there's nobody here yet. And I'm going, oh no, and I go back on the stage 6 times, I think, and I'm saying to myself, oh, come on, guys, what am I gonna sing the next time I go? I don't even know what I'm gonna do. So I started strumming the guitar and I started tuning it at the same time because it was out of tune. So once I started strumming it, I really didn't know what I was gonna sing. I didn't know what, I was fishing. I really was. I was fishing for some song to come to me. And I just started singing Freedom because that was what was running through my mind at the time. I just started singing Freedom.
Freedom, 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 freedom.
Richie was the first act because Richie was there. And Richie, of course, played his whole set and came off. And I said, great, wonderful, man. Play an encore, because we still didn't have anybody. I think he played 3 encores. And that's how the Freedom song got invented. I mean, he literally had nothing more that he could play. He didn't know anything more.
It was comical because you figured he's done, let's see who's next. And Richie came out again, Well, then he'd go off and it was like, let's see again. No, here comes Richie Havens again, yeah. And there weren't announcements, indicating this. It was just, you waited and he came back and he came back and he came back. But I remember when he finally went off, that the entire outfit that he was wearing was just drenched in sweat.
Mr. Richie Havens. What better way to start than with the beautiful Richie Havens?
It got to the point where people just showed up and we didn't know they were there. People just arrived. They had been told where to go, Holiday Inn, Best West, whatever it was, the hotels in the surrounding area. We told them where they were and they showed up there. And everybody would show up at the Holiday Inn. The people who had been working in this office were at these places to make sure that there were enough rooms and enough keys. Well, obviously, twice as many people showed up as were going to.
We suddenly realized that we did not have any way to get any artists in, that they were in the hotels that they checked in, but the roads were totally jammed. And I literally turned around to Annie, my then wife, and still good friend, and said, look up helicopter in the yellow pages and hire every single goddamn one you can lay your hands on. We had, in the end, I think, counting some of the others, The military ones, we ended up with something like 23 or 24 of them.
Et cetera. So we can't get through that way for the time being. So what they're going to do is they're going to try and raise the gig and get helicopters. They come over here to this field and pick us up and hop us over to the gig, and we'll leave the cars essentially here.
So what we had was this empty stage, and we couldn't find anybody. And this is before cell phones. This is, you go to the trailer, you call the hotel on the phone, somebody yells out the window a piece of information, which is, I can't find anybody, or they can't get through, or we don't have anybody. So who we got?
My manager came up to me and said, Leslie, whatever you do, don't stay all together, because they need groups to go on. And if they see all you guys together, they're going to get you on. You know, I didn't want to go on at 4 in the afternoon. So I stayed in one area and Felix was in another. And it worked out.
Joe McDonald had gotten in there somehow. He just drove in with somebody. And John says to me, can he play by himself? I don't know. Hasn't done it in a while. Ask him.
And I said, remember we were in Amsterdam a couple of months ago and we were talking about, you know, doing it on your own? Now, please.
Joe finally agrees to play, but he says, well, I don't have a guitar. We found a guitar. We push him out there, and he turns to me and says, what do I play? Do I do the cheer? Should I do Fixing the Dot Rag? I was going to do it on Sunday. And I said, go ahead and do it. So, shit. Turns around, yells, give me an F. It was loud. Give me a U, it gets louder. By the time he says, what's that spell? It's really a kind of an interesting thing to be out there in the middle of nowhere and hear fuck being yelled back at you by all these people for the first time. And from that point on, we had to keep putting people on. We pushed John Sebastian on because he was there. He wasn't even, we didn't even know he was there. Somebody said, oh, I saw John Sebastian.
Felix got up there and he introduced me to John Sebastian. He was tie-dyeing everything in sight. Somebody walked by and they got ripped into the tent and they came out with all kinds of colors on them. I think he was tripping his nut off. That I know for sure. And he was enjoying himself.
John Sebastian.
You know, like the press can only say bad things unless there ain't no fuck-ups. And it's looking like there ain't gonna be no fuck-ups. This is gonna work.
And there was a bunch of state cops on the helicopter with us. And they were just talking to each other and talking to us, and we were just sitting there like wondering what's going on and how come we gotta fly in here. And then I remember just looking out, because the door was open or something like that, and you could just look right out there. And it was an amazing thing. You know, when you look at all the pictures, from all the aerial shots of Woodstock, you see the fields completely filled with people. But that was a tiny, tiny part of where the people were. There was people for a long time that we were flying. There was people underneath every leaf of every tree and every rock that we was flying over. And that was supposed to play at some point, sometime later than I actually did. And because I was just hanging out, I felt free to indulge in some substance abuse. And nothing big, but you know. And so I was standing around just admiring the colors and all the people. And all of a sudden this guy comes up to me and says, "You gotta play." I said, "What?" "Yeah, you gotta play, man. You gotta play now." I'm going, "Now? Now I gotta play? I'm not ready to play now, man. I can't play now. I can't walk now." You know, and it was like, I couldn't believe it. And so there was this sort of tinge of like, uh-oh, that I really didn't want to deal with this at the moment.
But while Arlo was having a good time, and it seemed like the crowd was having a good time, the producers were on the phone with Rockefeller's office, trying to convince the governor not to send in the National Guard.
Rockefeller's office wanted to send in the National Guard to stop the festival. And all conversations with those people were, this is impossible. You'd really have a riot if you tried to do this. I'd come back to my office and start fielding phone calls. There were incredible phone calls that would be coming in from everybody from state government to police. They would say, "Can you give us some information about this disaster?" And I'd say, "What disaster? Everything is great here. We're getting along fine. We don't need anything. Everything's fine. It's great. Everybody's having a great time." And I would just keep putting that out. And to tell you the truth, on my walks, everything was fine. Everything was holding.
Everything had held. And so from Richie, Tim Hardin, Arlo, and finishing with Joan Baez, the first of 3 days of peace and music came quietly to a close.
Amen.
John Roberts, heir to the Polydent denture cream fortune, and Joel Rosenman, an ex-lounge singer and ambivalent Yale Law grad, were looking to write a pilot for a television show.
1967. It seemed likelier that I would be a TV screenwriter than a lawyer. And John was intrigued by this profession as well. So we concocted a TV show, a sitcom about two guys who get into nutty business ventures every week. And in order to find plot material for our TV show, we took out an ad in the Wall Street Journal. The ad read something like, "Young men with unlimited capital seek interesting and legitimate business propositions," which went fine for quite a while for our TV show until one idea that came in seemed reasonable to us. In fact, attractive. We looked at it the same way we had some other business ventures, only this one, with some modifications, seemed like a good idea. We called it Media Sound. We started building it in '68 and built what came to be the place to record on the East Coast for over a decade.
Joel and I were building a recording studio in Manhattan in the summer of 1968. And we met a lawyer at that time named Miles Lurie. And Miles called us up, I guess, maybe February of 1969, and said that he had a couple of clients who were interested in building a recording studio in Woodstock, New York. And he wondered if we would sit and talk with them about their project and share with them our experience in doing such a project here in the city. And we said, sure. And so Mike Lang and Artie Kornfeld showed up one morning in February to talk about building a recording studio in Woodstock.
Michael Lang grew up in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. After dropping out of NYU, he headed to Miami and opened one of the area's first head shops. Artie Kornfeld, also from Bensonhurst, was already a successful songwriter and record producer, and the first vice president of rock at Capitol Records. One day, Michael Lang came calling, looking for a record deal for a group he was managing called The Train.
First meeting with Michael is I was standing on my desk, smoking a little hash. Okay, I said that? Yeah. Well, it's over 7 years ago. And my secretary said, there's someone out here to see you named Michael Lang. And he said, you don't know him, but he's from the neighborhood, Bensonhurst, and he'd like just a minute of your time. So I said, send him in. He had just lost his head shop in Miami. I think he lost the battle with the police, and they closed it, because that's what Michael was. He was a head shop owner in Miami.
Yeah, my recollection, although it's probably embellished over the years, is I've already perched on the end of his desk, about to fly off into the room. He was a very delightful character, as I recall, already. At our first meeting, we sort of became friends instantly. He was from the same neighborhood I was, in Brooklyn. And it was sort of like a kindred spirit.
We were given a proposal for a recording studio. 30 of 31 pages dealt with finding the site. They already had a site. In fact, they had it under option. They had plans for the recording studio. They had rough sketches. They had a budget for the recording studio. They had the recording studio project. They had solved the problem of anonymity by suggesting in the last page of this proposal that on opening day of the recording studio, we have a big press party. There's even a chance, this proposal read, that we can get some of the local talent to perform. And the local talent was Bob Dylan, and maybe Janis Joplin and Tim Hardin and John Sebastian. I thought, wow, once they hear that Dylan is performing, we'll get people from all over. We don't have to bus recording studio execs up, we can just sell tickets. And so we came back to Michael and Artie with that suggestion. We don't like this recording studio project because we're in the dark about our own project in Manhattan and we don't know how well that's going to do. We're hoping. But it seems that the one up in the woods has some built-in drawbacks. But we think this is very exciting if we turn it into a festival idea. And we actually had to go round and round. We said, we drew the line at doing another studio. They drew the line at doing a festival, and eventually we suggested, how about if we do a festival and then with the profits from the rock and roll festival, we'll finance the recording studio. And we struck a deal on that basis. It was a compromise.
Shortly after, Michael turned his attention to staffing. He contacted sound engineer Stan Goldstein, who he'd worked with in Miami. Goldstein agreed to help and suggested they offer the position of Director of Operations to Mel Lawrence, who had produced such legendary festivals as Magic Mountain, Newport Pop, and Miami Pop in December of 1968.
As soon as we began talking about staffing, it seemed to me that Mel was an ideal guy to have involved, and so I chased him down.
And I get a call from Stan Goldstein. And Stan said, they're planning to do a number in New York. Are you interested? And I said I was. And he said, you've got to do this because this is going to be really a big one.
I'd left Fillmore East and I'd worked on a couple of small projects. And one day, Chip, Bert Cohen, and a couple of other people came and saw me in my house and talking about the project and what it was going to be. And I was sitting there thinking, this is never going to happen, And they came back within a week and said, this is what we're doing. We're going to go ahead and do this big festival. We're going to try to do an East Coast version of Monterey. And it's going to be 3 days. It's going to be in Woodstock. It's going to be da-da-da-da-da. We need your help. Do you want to do it? It was one answer. That was, yeah, sure, please, let me, yeah. So.
Long story short, what actually happened is I call Ann Weldon, who was Ann Morris at that time, John Morris's wife, who became a principal figure in Woodstock. And I said, may I share your Liberty Prince, please, and a bit of your wine so I can bring Michael here because I think we've got something going. And Michael and I seemed to hit it off, and John decided he was going to be co-producer, which was the only error of the evening. But beyond that, everything was perfect.
The idea was that the first day would be a folky, light type day. That the second day would be more of an English, stronger type thing, and that the third day would be the American strength. I mean, because don't forget, you had the English acts were major factor at that point, and then there were the California, San Francisco, and rest of them.
Michael, have you signed any groups yet? Oh yeah, it's together. Or no, he wouldn't say yes, because he wasn't lying about it. He'd just say, oh, it's all together, it's together. Don't worry, it's together. Not one group had been signed, at that point.
I had agonized over whether we would ask the Rolling Stones to be part of the talent roster. And their hit at the time was Street Fightin' Man. And while there was, to have the Stones on your talent in your talent package would have been very powerful. It contradicted one of our basic principles of trying to keep this festival peaceful. We just didn't want anything that would stir up the crowd to that kind of anger.
I don't think we should have the Doors. Yeah, I think Sly's dangerous because there's been riots everywhere. He's played in the last 10 years. That's why certain groups were not invited. At that point, it was just inviting them and they'd come, just for expenses to get there.
Ian Anderson and I had a real long conversation about how he never got over the fact and just never could understand why Country Joe and the Fish were at Woodstock and they weren't. He never forgot that. I mean, he was really pissed about it. That summer I had worked for the Doors. I did some dates in Mexico with the Doors. And Jim Morrison would not appear because he was afraid he would be assassinated. I mean, that was his line. I mean, he thought he would be killed.
Yeah, Joni Mitchell. She was begging to come. But she wanted to come, and Michael said no. He even asked me at the time, what about Joni Mitchell? What do you think about, I feel really bad about that. I feel guilty.
Bill Lauder from the Jefferson Airplane called me and said, Bill, those roads are really small, man. I mean, like, how are we going to get there? So, well, you just get to Liberty and we'll take it from there.
Actually, Michael says that it is his fault that Dylan didn't come. They evidently didn't lock in some way. Something happened.
The Who had turned us down. We kept after him and after him after him. They turned us down. And Frank Barcelona, who runs Premier Talent, finally said, okay, there's only one way to do this. And we had Pete Townsend to dinner at Frank's apartment. And we got Peter up there. We fed him a spaghetti dinner. We chatted. We talked. We started pouring wine in him and pouring wine in ourselves. And Peter just kept saying, no, we don't want to do it. We want to do tango, wouldn't go home. And at about 5 o'clock in the morning, Peter is sitting down in the corner, all scrunched up like this, saying, all right, I'll play the thing. Can I go to sleep, please? We wore him down and tricked him into it. Not tricked. Well, he would say we tricked him into it. They published on the Live at Leeds album, if you look in the album, the contract from Woodstock's on it.
The phone rang in this production office, and someone hands me the phone and says, it's Stephen Stills. They really didn't want to do this show because there were going to be too many people, nobody's going to know who they were really unsure of themselves. And right about that time, for some weird reason, Hanley was testing the sound system, and one of the very popular records that everybody was playing that summer was the Crosby, Stills and Nash first album, and Sweet Judy Blue Eyes. It's blaring over the sound system. I stick the phone out the window and I told Stephen, okay, Stephen, they're playing the song, everybody knows it, you should come. So he yells at Crosby, Crosby, they're playing Sweet Judy Blue Eyes. And he says, we'll be there. And so, they were going to show up, but there was this sort of apprehension. I mean, there's lots of people who really won't cop to it, but it is true that I think they reached a point in the late summer where everybody who wasn't on the bill really wanted to be on the bill.
Our first choice was a piece of land in Saugerties, New York. 700 acres. Right off the exit 18 of the thruway. Absolutely beautiful, gently sloping land.
We met with the owner, a fellow named Schaller, shortly after that to start hammering out a lease. we didn't even get to hammer any little one bit of that lease before Mr. Schaller told us that he had no interest in renting to Longhairs. Not that John and I looked like Longhairs, but he had already seen Michael. And for an elderly guy, he really had his ear to the ground. There's no question in his mind what we were going to use the property for. And he just would have none of it. It was his farm and he loved it. So I think we were getting a little desperate about real estate, John and I. And at a certain point we jumped in our car and just started roaming around. I think we got off the Quickway and saw a sign saying property and real estate for rent or sale or whatever, inquire, and we inquired.
And the Mills property was the second or third place we came to, and it was appropriate. It wasn't great, but it had the virtue of being owned by someone who was willing to rent it to us.
I'm sitting in my office with my accountant, and three gentlemen walked into my office and said that they wanted to rent the property for a small concert, maybe 5,000 to 15,000 people, similar to what they have up in Massachusetts, and would I be interested in renting it to them? Well, at the time, I could see no harm in it, so I made an agreement with them, and they left. And as they left, my accountant sat there and says, where are they going to find 5,000 damn fools to sit in the grass and listen to music?
Mill's property was a move of desperation. It was nothing like what I wanted. I wanted someplace that felt natural and open and free, and Mill's property was land that had been misused, chopped up, and Mill's job was to make it right again. It probably would have looked pretty good, I think, by the time that we finished with it. Mel got a pretty good crew together and did a lot of work and laid it out pretty well. And I think it would have been green and pleasant by the time August rolled around. But it was not the ideal by any stretch of the imagination.
Having to settle for a less than perfect site wasn't the only problem facing the producers. Wallkill officials were told the concert would feature folk music and arts and crafts, but some of the townspeople weren't buying it.
Well, we were having political problems in Wallkill. The town, which had initially welcomed us and given us the various permits we needed, became concerned as the spring and summer of 1969 wore on, that this was going to be a major disruption. And my sense was that these were not people you could reason with. I can remember going to one town meeting there where Michael Lang, who had very long hair in those days, stood up to talk, and there were catcalls because he had long hair, and some guy would say, is that Miss Lang or is that Mr. Lang? That sort of thing. And there was a sense that, they didn't like us generically.
We attended many kinds of meetings, where since I was the straightest looking member of the group, I would do a lot of talking to these town meetings, about what we planned. I guess it was convincing enough. Because a lot of those meetings ended with a lot of shaking the hand and, gee, we didn't know you knew about this kind of stuff. But then when they go back, they'd say, like, wait a second, this is all too nice, And I think they went to bed that night and said to their wife, I don't know about that guy, or I don't know about those guys, no matter what they say.
The issue of whether or not there should be a music festival in the town of Wallkill, our only experience had been what had happened in California, and there was some violence and there were some drugs and so on and so forth, and I think that we didn't feel that Wallkill was a place. Even at that time, I think they were talking about 25 or 30,000 people in the middle of this residential neighborhood. It made no sense to us.
At that point, Dennis Cosgrove and several other individuals, some state police officers in the area, were quite concerned with the project. They retained me and asked what they could do to stop the project at that point.
My secretary calls me, says the governor's on the phone, he don't sound happy. And I picked up the phone, he says, Nelson here? Howard, I don't know what the hell you're doing down there, but get rid of it. That was the end of that conversation.
At some magic moment when Jack Schlosser, the town supervisor, suddenly began to take sides and said something about Richard Daley having known how to deal with crowds of hippies. I lost my temper. And there was a certain amount of shouting going on back and forth, and the meeting came rapidly to a close.
Right after he gave that speech, I think, is when he sat down next to me, and the people behind us made that comment about, if any one of those kids comes on my land, I'm going to shoot them, and I have the gun to do it.
In the middle of the night, my wife gets a call, they're going to burn your house down. And later on that night, about 3 o'clock in the morning, a friend of mine who I grew up with called me and said, I have to meet you on a back road, and I don't want to be seen with you. I'd known him all my life, and I couldn't figure out what the hell's going on. So I drove up there, and he told me that he'd been sitting in a bar and overheard conversations where they were forming a vigilante committee to do away with me.
They passed a law that we felt was fairly definitive in terms of foreclosing our ability to use that town. Well, we felt about the only organization that could comply with these laws would be a monastery that whose members had taken a vow of silence. This law was designed, not very artfully, but very effectively, to preclude us having a festival there. If you have a law that says no noise can emanate more than 10 feet from the property line, you pretty much have foreclosed children playing in the backyard or anything else, let alone amplified rock concerts. So we knew when that law was passed that we were dead.
I thought, in fact, that we had reasonable grounds and ought to try to stay there rather than just abandon it. However, that wasn't part of anyone else's idea of the right thing to do. So folks scattered looking for sites.
And the night we lost Walkill, Michael came over and we sat there giggling about it. See, because to Michael, even at that point when we lost the site, it was still like we laughed about it because we knew it was going to come off anyway, and that's what was supposed to happen, lose Walkill.
And when we lost the Walkill site, we realized we had lost it. Although there was a great deal of panic and disappointment for a few days, it was always, there's a better one out there and we're going to find it. And we did.
With time running out and no legitimate prospects for finding a new site, a call from an unlikely ally would steer the guys to Sullivan County in the town of Bethel, just 50 miles west of Walkill.
We got a call from Elliot Tiber the weekend after during the weekend of our discovery that we were no longer going to be in Walkill.
He said, I have the permits and I have the perfect place.
And Elliot said that he had read about this, what happened to Walkill, and he said, I have a big property. Come and see it. Goldstein and I shot up there.
The site that he had to offer was connected to a motel that was owned by the Tiber family. And Mel and I went up to take a look at the site, which turned out to be a swamp. We wound up in mud up to our knees and just covered with shit.
And it was like this giant bowl, you know, with all these trees around it, and Stan and I are looking at it and saying there's a lot of trees where, you know, we'd have to cut down all these trees. But let's go down to the bottom and see what's happening. We went down, it's a swamp, a total swamp down there. And we said, this is impossible. And we said to this guy, Elliot, what do you expect us to do a show in a swamp? Put up a stage and everything and all these trees, and you know, we were sort of pissed off at the guy. And we left.
But then there was another call that came in, and Mill and I went up together. And we went to see Elliot. I remember meeting him and a real estate agent at his motel.
And we met Yasgur, and then he jumped in the car, and it was the middleman and Yasgur and Michael and myself, and we went driving around Yasgur's farm. And the piece that he showed first was this huge field, but flat as a board. I look at Michael and I say, wow, you know, 100,000 people, they're not going to see anything. And then Max said something like, well, do you want something with a little contour to it? And we said, yeah.
And we came down Herd Road and came up over the crest, and there was the bowl. And we knew immediately this was our new home, somehow.
The two of them stand there without any assistance from the realtor or anybody else, and all of a sudden Michael says, this is where we have to be. What's the deal, Max? Well, you'll have to clean up after yourself. We certainly will. My cables are still buried 4 foot underground. We couldn't get them out with a bulldozer. Anyway, there's power there for anything that you want, you know. Just let me know, I'll tell you where it is.
Yeah, Max actually found us. Max was 50 miles away. He'd been following the accounts of of our battles in Wallkill, and when we were thrown out, he called us. And Mel and Michael went up to see him and looked at the land and called me and said, "You've got to get up here and take a look at this and make a deal with this farmer." And I, hopped on my motorbike and got up there as quickly as I could and made a deal with Max. And we hit it off very well. He was a delightful, charming guy.
I'm sure that what went through his mind was, hey, I don't have these prejudices. I don't mind kids on my property. I don't mind a rock and roll festival. I think that'd be fun.
The Yasgurs were decent, gentle, caring people. They came to our rescue. There would have been no Woodstock without Max and Miriam Yasgur.
We have a gentleman with us. It's the gentleman upon whose farm we are, Mr. Max Yasgur.
This is the largest group of people ever assembled in one place. But above that, the important thing that you've proven to the world is that 500,000 young people can get together and have 3 days of fun and music, and have nothing but fun and music, and I God bless you for it.
But some of the people in White Lake didn't share Max's vision, and opposition to the festival being held in their community began to mount, just like in Wallkill.
Max was a pretty important person in that county, and he had a lot of good contacts there, and we sort of felt we were going to generate some opposition once people realized what was going on there, but that if we moved forward with a sort of surge of inevitability, that we might just squeak through before the opposition could marshal its forces and stop us. And that's in essence what happened. I mean, as I say, Max had some good friends who helped us, and the opposition never really developed quite enough power to stop us. They came close. We had one huge problem. We'd sold about $1 million worth of tickets for Wallkill. So we had to make sure that everybody knew that anyone who had bought tickets for Wallkill, those tickets would be honored in White Lake. The press had been carrying accounts of how the festival was dead and there wouldn't be one, so we had to counteract that. We had to continue to work with our ticket outlets to make sure they continued to sell tickets. So it was a nightmarish problem for that roughly 30-day period to make sure that ticket sales went forward and that people who were confused about where this festival was going to be knew where it was going to be.
Well, it's two guys in a straw hat and overalls with blunderbusses saying, stay out of town, you know. We didn't consider ourselves to be that at all. You know, we're a pretty rural area here, but we didn't consider ourselves to be country pumpkins, but they certainly painted us to be.
I thought that was exactly what we were dealing with in that town, and I was all for it.
I didn't like the ad. It just struck me that an ad featuring two obvious rednecks with blunderbusses, I guess it looked like it. Is that right? I seem to remember these sort of caricature shotguns. It went over the line for me in terms of the anger and the confrontation element in it. I just didn't want anything like that associated with the festival. I was outvoted.
We got to White Lake July 15th, and the festival was August 15th. So it just moved forward like an enormous tidal wave, and by the time that festival started, we had 1,000 people hammering and building and constructing and what have you, and it had a sort of inevitability about it.
I felt that if we were going to do a project like this, that we needed a technical director like Langhart. And to work with Chris for 15 minutes was to figure out this was the greatest genius. This was this strange Ichabod Crane-looking guy who just understood what everything was made of. So I campaigned very, very heavily to bring Chris in, and I was right.
We're standing on West Shore Road looking towards Bethel at about where the bridge was overhead. And over this way was Filippini's Pond. And coming back through this way, then you come to the heliport, and then further down in that low spot where the office trailers, where my office was, and the payroll office where the people gathered in the morning to discern which tasks they were going to have. And then coming across here, we had, mostly this road was blocked up with people walking. And overhead was the bridge. We had a couple phone poles here and a couple phone poles there. And we had some, I don't know, 12 by 9s or something, whatever could be found locally to span the road. Because I felt that the performers on the way from the heliport to the stage would get mobbed if there was, you know, all this walking road business. We had to have some way to keep the performer pavilion, which was on that side, from the stage, which was on this side. Over here is the stage. There's this kind of flat place here, and then the hill rises up, and then there's a kind of a dip, and then it goes on again. And so the stage was quite high compared to modern concerts, because you have a situation where if it wasn't, then everybody that was caught in the dip wouldn't be able to see the performers. So we had no option here except to make the stage real high so that the people who were down front were looking up and the people further out were looking across and the people from the top were looking down. It also extended the field because you could then see from much further back the stage as a result of being high enough so you could see it.
A lot of people were getting cold feet because they'd heard that the festival site had been shifted. They heard that there were problems. There were rumblings in the press that things weren't going well, that the construction on the festival was lagging behind. It was all true, and nobody really knew what was going to happen.
Most of that month it rained, and that hampered our ability to prepare the stage and build the gates and all the concession areas and the roads and the power. And I mean, there was just an enormous amount to do, and we were down to literally 28 days to do it.
It was an enormous undertaking. The plots and plans that had been made, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars and hundreds of man-hours had been put into the previous site. The Yasgur site was just gorgeous. It was just head and shoulders for sheer beauty, so much better than the mill site. It was as though it had been designed for the job, except there were no roads, there was no water. We had to dig wells, we had to bring in power. Power had existed at the other place, so suddenly utilities became an enormous undertaking, whereas previously utilities had been a very small, simple consideration.
There was 650,000 watts of light sitting underneath the stage rusting. Nowhere to hang it. There was another 20,000 watts on the Joshua Light Show at the backing or the rear screen. The rear screen couldn't be hung because we couldn't find a stable enough position for it with those 5 trusses. The roof was never finished.
It was a complex stage structure to support the lights, an exotic overhead structure, which once it was in place would have been quite extraordinary. Unfortunately, getting it in place required the choreography of enormous quantities of people and heavy equipment, a couple of cranes and this and that and this and that. We had to lay roads, enormous roads, prepare road beds and so forth. And all of that working around Max's harvest schedule and milking schedule. Electricity didn't get there till the last moment. Telephones didn't get there till the very last moment. And so it was a haul every last minute of the time.
First of all, they pulled enormous all-nighters for days to try and finish this. The Thursday before the Friday of the show, they were just barely getting the sound down. I remember Hanley showing up with all this stuff and just rolling his eyes and saying, "Where am I going to put the sound system?"
No, I didn't wonder. I designed and laid it out to begin with. We stopped the car and could get out of the car, and I went walking up looking the whole thing over and found these dips in the land and So I laid the stage out and designed the V and the security thing from all the festivals that I had done and watched, had learned from those beforehand. Because nobody was really out to make the concert more like what you might hear in the recording studio when you're doing a mix down. Fidelity, full frequency response as best we could at the time, and then mixing it together. And we were trying to do that so that everybody could hear and understand what was being said to the last seat in the house.
We didn't obtain an actual permit to do the show in White Lake until probably hours before the show. In the meantime, the local building inspector was very conscious of the fact that if we didn't proceed with our work, that in fact we were not going to be in a position to accommodate the crowds, and or some other bad things would happen. The stage construction would be even further behind than it was. And so we simply made a little backdoor arrangement that when we were enjoined from working, while waiting for our permits, while making our final appeals on this and that and so forth, and stop work orders were issued, he would come by, wake me up, I would go get my car, and then he would start a journey around the site posting stop work notices, and I would follow along behind him and remove the stop work notices. I was not one of the four partners, so I was the most easily sacrificed of the big names. And so what are you laughing at, Duke? It's true. It's true. It's a subject of midnight meetings. Who gets arrested on this one?
I had the checkbook, and there were people who signed John's name who were not John to those checks. And suddenly we were paying, what amounted to ransoms, sky-high ransoms, to get these things done at the very last minute.
Can you dig that? New York State Thruway is closed, man.
Well, there's really a hard any way to explain how it was. There was no firehouse over there at that time. It was just a little grass and some bungalows. And we went to bed on Thursday night. There was no noise. We got up Friday morning, and this whole road that you see vacant now, all the way up through, cars, people jammed, just one lane going all the way up to the site.
We had, I think it was over 500 acres, might have been 600 acres, for parking alone. And we had people on that property who could guide people in and get them off the road. But the state police didn't get there, didn't deploy their people until hours after they said they would. And by the time they did, 17B was a parking lot.
Well, the state police didn't do anything wrong. What happened really was if we'd had the 100,000 people we were expecting, that would have been 20 to 30,000 cars. And we probably could have handled that without too much trouble because we had hundreds of acres of parking lots. But two things happened. One, we had 4 to 5 times as many people show up, so you had 4 to 5 times as many cars. Two, it rained. So many of the parking lots were a sea of mud.
Obviously, we knew then and there that we couldn't put people in parking lots, and so we began to just hope to seal off perimeter areas way far away, miles away, stop the flow of traffic into the festival, try to keep one lane open in most of the roads for emergency services, primarily medical.
I stood out on the thruway with, or on the access road from the thruway with the state police trying to get traffic to turn around at the exit. It was impossible to get cars to turn around. I mean, they were strewn everywhere.
By Friday afternoon, there were cars on every road, in every field, for miles and miles and miles. In fact, I don't even know if everybody ever got their car. I mean, it's the thing I always wondered. I said, well, okay, did anybody just give up and abandon their car? I mean, there were cars everywhere, literally everywhere.
Frankly, the traffic jams and all of the baggage and the impedimenta and things that kept people from coming, had we had another 100,000, we would have been in deep shit.
I mean, when you had 60,000 people in a field a day and a half before the show was going to start, we knew that we were in for something. There was no question about it.
You know, there are 500,000–600,000 people in the field. There's another 1.5 million people physically trying to get in. We're jumping to hiring helicopters. We're desperate to keep water moving, the rest of it. I mean, we had a whole different thing from this laid-back concert festival that we're just going to have and it'll all be gone. And we're suddenly in the city management business.
We spent a great deal of time conceptually thinking about what we wanted to do here. And the cornerstone of our thinking was this concept of peace and music. And peace was not intended as some kind of code word for get out of Vietnam. Peace was a shorthand way of saying a weekend of freedom from whatever is bothering you. Just come to the country and have a nice time. And part of that we felt was that the people that came to Woodstock should feel that they were in a place that welcomed them, that didn't fear them, mistrust them, suspect that they were going to do wrong. Part of the problem with other festivals that we'd seen was that there was sort of a mutual antagonism between festival goers, say people 18 to 22 or 23 years old, and those charged with keeping them calm. And we felt this didn't have to be. So we designed the site, we designed our security procedures around the concept of working with the people coming to the festival, making them feel welcome and comfortable. And Wes Pomeroy took a lot of credit for that, and properly so.
There was a bottom line where it said, you can't go any farther and we're not going to let you. Well, we had never planned to do that at Woodstock. And unfortunately, never came to a test because there was no gate. There was nothing to defend, but we had some very specific strategies on what to do about that. And it had to do with everything from having Ken Kesey park his bus right up next to the fence and dig a hole underneath it. So we let people who just had to fool us do it, to my having, planning to have a couple thousand tickets in my pocket and becoming the focus. We had a confrontation at the gate and arguing and negotiating and finally giving in and giving tickets and saying, well, I expect you to help clean up and that sort of thing, knowing some would and some wouldn't. From the very beginning, it was not going to be confrontational.
It became clear to all of us from watching newsreels that if the crowd wanted to be unruly, it would be. This was quite worrisome to us. So decisions that we made about security, about the National Guard, about keeping the entertainment going throughout the night, about creating a little baby animal zoo, about naming our streets Happy Way and Groovy Path, and everything we put out about this festival had an element of neighborliness and peace and respect for your fellow man and responsibility towards society, toward your society, your counterculture. And I guess in a way, you'd have to credit mostly the audience.
It wasn't a plan, it was an accident. And some very good people, wavy, no teeth. That was Tom Mix's cowboy hat. It really was that he was wearing. We're gonna make breakfast in bed for 600,000 people, The accident of the guru showing up. And somebody coming in the office and saying that this Indian man would like to speak to the audience. And thinking, I haven't got any acts, why not? Let's put him on. And putting him on with all his followers sitting around him, and he in that high squeaky voice talking about peace. All the people in the world should be nice. And he was fabulous, and he just leveled it out.
But the time has come for America to help the whole world.
It's funny. I mean, all of it went down very quickly, but I saw some kids really getting hurt on the fence, climbing over the fence. And I felt that if we kept these fences up and tens of thousands of people were starting to arrive, that it would be really dangerous and it would cause the kind of bad vibes, a really bad scene. And I started, I told my guys to start taking down the fence.
You know, he had all these great plans, everything was going to work like clockwork and everything's going to be fine, but there were all these people. And I mean, like, did anybody collect their tickets?
And there were discussions about how we were going to get these people out, and it was simple. We were just going to go in there and tell them to go outside so we can take their tickets. I really think at that time we thought we could just get them to leave and be able to take their tickets. Or another thing that was discussed was to take their tickets right in there. But in any event, we were going to take the ticket, and those who didn't have the ticket were going to have to go out and get one.
The question was, do we call it a free show, do we cancel the show, or do we throw everybody out and collect the tickets?
There was this conference immediately in the morning on the early day, and it was like, what do we do? And Artie made the suggestion, which I have never figured out. Why don't we do like they do in the Catholic Church and get girls in diaphanous gowns and give them collection baskets, and we'll send them out in the audience and they can get the money, because otherwise we're not going to get any money.
I thought it was a good idea. I was a little spaced at the time. I was hanging with Garcia and Hart for about 7 hours, and I wasn't quite my normal self. You know, I said, let's pass a hat.
And actually, the hat got passed a couple of times. The bucket got passed. And people actually threw money in it. I don't remember how, I used to remember how much money got collected, but I don't remember, but money did get collected.
I can tell you who made it a free festival. The audience made it a free festival by being there. I mean, there was no way we were getting that crowd out of that field and bringing them back in through gates that didn't exist. It just was. They came early. They came before we had a chance to get the ticket booths up. They came looking for places to buy tickets. And they just weren't there when they arrived. And so the crowd came in, and there was no feasible way to collect money for tickets. And so it was really stating the obvious.
So we knew going in that if people came without tickets, we weren't going to be able to stop them. And there was part of the philosophy of the festival, there wouldn't be armed people there saying, you can't come in. And so Friday morning, when we woke up, there were 50,000 people sitting in the performance area, and it was a fact of life that we weren't going to be able to collect tickets.
What then happened was I went to the office, sat down, picked up the phone, called John and Joel in the White Lake office, and said, look, I mean, the obvious is the obvious. There are vast numbers of people in that field. There is no way we are going to move them out of that field. It's a free concert, and I think that we would set a tone by going up on stage and announcing the obvious. John and Joel said, go for it. So I walked on stage and told everybody what they already knew.
This is one thing that I was going to wait a while before we talked about, but maybe we'll talk about it now so you can think about it. It's a free concert from now on. That doesn't mean that anything goes. What that means is we're going to put the music up here for free. What it means is that the people who are backing this thing, who put up the money for it, are going to take a bit of a bath. A big bath. That's no hype, that's truth. They're going to get hurt. But what it means is that these people have it in their heads that your welfare is a hell of a lot more important, and the music is than $1. Now, let's face the situation. We've had thousands and thousands of people come here today. Many, many more than we knew or even dreamt or thought would be possible. We're going to need each other to help each other to work this out because we're taxing the systems that we have set up. We're going to be bringing the food in. But the one major thing you have to remember tonight when you go back up into the woods to go to sleep, or if you stay here, is that the man next to you is your brother. And you damn well better treat each other that way, because if they don't, then we blow the whole thing. But we've got it right there.
There was no sense that this was a free festival. We were sparing no expense really to make it perfect, to make it just as we had advertised. So it's kind of amusing to hear that it was a free festival any more than it would be free if I gave your camera to somebody, your TV camera. It's free to them, but it sure wasn't free to you.
Free stage, there was only one stage in Woodstock. No, there was two. You know, we were just tucked over to the side. We were hired on to play for the overflow. And who'd have thought the overflow was going to be like 100,000? And so we did our thing day and night, day and night.
We knew that some people were going to come without tickets in '69 because it was sort of part of the culture. And we prepared for those people. We prepared free kitchens and free campgrounds and free stages and put a sound system from the main stage in the free campground.
They decided to set up the free stage at the bottom of that little hill and make it better with a little wooden stage and everything. And, you know, until the festival really started cooking with all the big name attractions arriving, we were basically it. There was one particular afternoon, early afternoon, our wonderful friend Joan Baez showed up at the free stage area, and she wanted to take part in the entertainment there. And she sat there, I would think, for at least a couple of hours, maybe more.
We didn't have any idea of the historical event that it was going to turn out to be. And so now, 43 years later, I'm saying, geez, I was glad to be part of it. Every time I catch a glimpse of the Woodstock movie, I just feel good.
There's a really funny story that that not many people know about. I forget the name of the guy, but there was a gentleman from the New York State Health Department who was supposed to come and inspect the health facilities on Friday. And this guy came directly to my office, and I was to send one of the people that worked for me around with him to show him the Johns, the hospital setup, the water treatment, all the kinds of things that, you know, all the things that they were concerned about. He came with his daughter, who was about 15 years old. And while we were talking in the trailer, my office, his daughter went outside and disappeared. Why? I'll never know. But that guy spent the next 3 days looking for his daughter. He never inspected the health facilities, which he could have shut us down. And, you know, I don't know what happened to the daughter, but she may have saved the whole festival, you know?
The first words, in fact, said at Woodstock, publicly, over the PA, were "holy shit." Chris Langhart and I were standing on stage with Bill Hanley praying that the sound system was going to be finished. I turned around and the sun was starting to come up, and I looked out and the whole damn field was full of people. And without thinking, I broke the vow I'd always made to my mother, never swear on stage. I just said, "Holy shit."
Wheat Germ, Holly has your bag with your medicine. Please meet at the information booth as soon as you can, please. Helen Savage, please call your father at the Motel Glory in Woodridge. Helen Savage, please call your father at the...
Early on, it became evident to me that we could not provide the PA to give all these messages. At first we tried, but then there were just too many of them. So we set up a message board, and that was between people who were at the festival.
The warning that I've received, you may take it with however many grains of salt you wish, that the brown acid that is circulating around us is not specifically too good.
I thought those announcements were fairly important for the individuals who made them or who asked for them.
Please be advised that there is a warning.
And it also gave us something to fill with. It was a far more personal attribute than it was to just play music. Joel and Jody, would you please meet each other at tower number 4 because she has your insulin. Right, he wants to get high, Jody's got the dope, and freaking you know what you're doing, but it's just, like, what do you say? You know, it just has to be read. So they became stars in their own right.
And sometime, maybe it was around 1 in the morning on Friday morning, Joel and I decided to take a ride to visit the parking areas, which had been fairly muddy that day from the rains. But at some point, we crested a hill, must have been a mile from the actual site of the festival. And we stopped our bikes, and I can remember just looking out over the hills towards where the festival site was, and all you could see were campfires at that hour. And I had this sense of this sort of massive army, you know, before the battle, you know, waiting there. And I don't know, it reminded me of Henry V for some reason, you know, before Agincourt, and of an army waiting to go into battle the next morning. And it was a very still, almost misty evening. And Joel and I just sort of looked at each other with this look, that great expression that Keats has, you know, with a look of wild surmise. What does all this mean for us, and what will the morrow bring? And then we went back to the rest of our lives, but it was really a wonderful, still moment there, which I'll always remember.
When dawn hit, after catching a couple hours of sleep in my office on the floor, I went for another walk, and I walked around, and everybody was sleeping. Everybody, the crew, the security, the hospital people, all the people who had come to the show, everybody was sleeping. It seemed like I was the only one awake. I also knew that elsewhere in the United States and New York State, they thought that we were in this area of devastation. And when the sun started baking, and I forget what time it was, it could have been 8:30, 9 o'clock, I found one of the people from Hanley Sound. I forget who it was, but I said, could you turn on the PA? Because I want to talk to these people. I said, I do want to say good morning to you and say, wasn't that an incredible night last night? And everybody, yeah! And I just want to tell you that today is going to be even more incredible. And I read off the list of talent that there'll be. And then I said, we got a couple of hours before the show starts. And it was sort of this, everything is okay, don't worry about a thing. The show is going to go on, we're not going to have to stop this thing, and everything's secure.
What we have in mind is breakfast in bed for 400,000. Now, it's not going to be steak and eggs or anything, but it's going to be good food, and we're going to get it to you.
I asked for $3,000 from the festival to buy the food. And when I went to town, within a day and a half, I'd spent $3,000. I went into the office in New York and got another $3,000, just like that. And we bought all these giant cleavers from Chinatown, these big cutters, and we bought 35 garbage pails to put all the food in before, so we could serve it. And we had giant stainless steel pots, and 5 different stoves were cooking at once. And the booths were 5 booths with 10 serving sides to them. And they were always had lines, real long lines to them. I ended up buying 160,000 paper plates, forks, knives, and spoons, and about 30,000 paper cups. And it's a good thing I did, because they all went. Everything went. So that's how I figured that we fed between 160,000 to 190,000 people at the Hog Farm Free Kitchen.
There were bagels backstage, and by the time I heard that there were some bagels backstage, they were all gone. But my manager, this guy, they asked for too much money. Somehow, his wife put half a dozen fried chickens in the helicopter. And at midnight, he whipped them out. Nobody had any food there. There was nothing left backstage. And all of a sudden I turn around and I see all the guys in my group eating chicken. I said, would you look at this? And there were people like drooling over these chickens. And it wasn't too appetizing, I was too nervous to eat, but I couldn't believe it that all of a sudden there was a barbecue back there that we brought from the city, and there were people, it looked like people were starving up there.
The clear recollection of the difference between how the performers were being treated versus what we were hearing, or I was hearing about what was going on in the audience, was, it was a very lavish performer's tent, if I seem to recall. It was a big open area made out of poles with a big tenting over it, and it was a large area with rows of tables. And seated at this one table was Grace Slick and Janis Joplin, both kind of like turning around to each other and picking at this food, saying that the strawberries were already melting. And somebody should take the helicopter and go get more frozen strawberries. And I just thought that was just a bit bizarre.
I mean, people have always wondered what Bill Graham had to do with any of this. Well, Bill didn't have anything to do with it, really, but he kept his finger in, just as a presence. He happened to be at Grossinger's that weekend. He happened to be there. And he had convinced his sister, who was from New York, to bring this freezer full of steaks so that he could have a barbecue out there on the lawn. And he created this enormous barbecue, and I remember some guys in the band and the guys in Creedence at this barbecue. And on one hand you've got thousands of people, and on the other hand you've got this guy barbecuing. It was very, very, very portentous of things to come in the future, and the division between the bands and the audience.
We knew we had to go with some new talent. Santana was there because I had seen them in San Francisco with Graham, and I just was staggered. They were fabulous. I mean, they didn't have a record contract at that point, but Graham was the power, one of the major powers, certainly as a promoter in the country. He was very against festivals. Graham obviously wanted them there. We wanted Graham's friendship. And booking Santana, who he was very close to, was a way of quieting him down. So they were booked because they were a great band. They were booked because there was political advantage.
For nobody knowing who in the hell we were, we really got a good spot. I think we went on Saturday night just before the lights took effect. We used Sun amplifiers, and Felix used 4 stacks with 4 12s in each, and I used 4 stacks. But when I did my solo, all of a sudden I heard the whole stage turn on. My road manager hooked me into his stacks, and all of a sudden I had 8 stacks of these Suns, and it scared me. The sound is just the movement of air. And these speakers were pumping, and I felt a gust of wind push me. I turned around, I said, wow, he turned them all on. And then I was off down there. You could hear me. I thought we could have been much bigger if we were in that movie. You know, I still haven't gotten over that.
No, and I don't know why Mountain wasn't contracted. It was just that at this point, things were not very well coordinated. We were just rushing to do what we could, and I would imagine that our focus was on getting the biggest names we could to release.
We got down to the wire with no camera crews at Woodstock, with the exception of the crews that Michael hired.
We had to call Wadley was in town. I had to get Wadley to come in right away to have him come over to sign that he was going to direct it. Okay? And I just said to them, hey guys, We've spent $2.5 million. Why don't you shoot craps with 100 grand so we could buy film? So they said, okay.
The reticence on the part of some artists was not even so much about money, it was about, well, I want to see what my performance looks like and what it sounds like before I release it. And that I could understand. So I felt some of them would like to be in the film, but they wouldn't be in it until they'd seen their performance and how it was recorded. And then some of them, it was just money.
Michael said, Artie, you're the only one that could convince these people, you know, because your name in the business. You got to meet him at the helicopter and get him to sign that consent to be shot without us giving him the money, because we don't even have the money to pay for the show. You're going to have to convince them that they're not going to get 50% more to be shot for a movie. Do you think it was easy convincing these groups to convince Janis Joplin to sign a paper to do a movie when she was drunk, to go to The Who and convince them to sign a paper without getting paid?
Having the movie was of great value to us, even though John and I had a small piece of that movie. It brought us back to even sometime in 1980, I guess. So it's lucky for us that there was a film.
The only two acts that didn't play Woodstock were Jeff Beck and Iron Butterfly. Beck canceled well before the festival. We knew he wasn't coming, that was it. But if you go down the list, those are the only two that are listed that didn't play. Iron Butterfly, whose manager I think I forgot the minute I ever talked to him, sent me a telegram and then called and informed me that their plane would arrive in LaGuardia at X hour. And that at that hour, a helicopter would meet the band and would fly them directly to the site, whence they would go straight to the stage, they would perform their set, and they would be then loaded back into the helicopters and they would be flown from the site back to LaGuardia Airport so that they could continue on with their lives. Yeah, sure. So I called Western Union and I got this operator on the phone and I said, look, I know it is illegal in a telegram to say profanities. And this lady and I developed a way to write 4 reasons unto clarification, no, and we managed to send them a telegram, which basically, as you read it and it was printed, had no swear words in it, but going down said F-U-C-K space Y-O-U. And we devised it and we sent it, and I have never, and it is, 24, 25 years later, heard another word from that band, and it gave me the greatest pleasure in the world. Bill came to me and said, Sly's not ready to go on yet, man. He doesn't feel the vibes. Well, by this point, I didn't feel the vibes either. And so I went to the trailer and got by Sly's manager and asked Sly to come down to his tour bus, down the steps of the tour bus. And he came down this tour bus, and I reached up and I grabbed him and I slammed him up against the thing and I lifted him up in the air and I said, you lowlife, if you're not on the stage in 3 minutes, I'm gonna take your head off your goddamn shoulder, and dropped him. And he just looked at me and his eyes were the size of basketballs and he walked to the trailer and he said, we're on. And they went on and they did a fabulous show.
But Sly wasn't the only band causing trouble. The Grateful Dead wanted a do-over.
For some reason, I remember them coming off complaining about something. And they wanted to go back on. And, this is a little new to me. I didn't know if you were allowed to do that.
And the Who refused to play until they got paid in cash.
The artists all wanted to be there. I mean, no one left and refused to perform. Okay. The Who.
If the Who don't get paid, the Who aren't going on.
The business side of it was of great concern to John and me. Sometimes they preoccupied us because it seemed like a life or death situation for the festival at that moment. An example would be that Saturday night incident that you heard about with a couple of bands that refused to play unless they were paid in cash. And there we had a wonderful relationship with Charlie Prince that came to the rescue. Charlie Prince was our banker in Sullivan County. That night, Charlie got into a helicopter in his pajamas and was flown to his bank at midnight and rummaged around and found me some cashier's checks that had by accident not been locked up in the time vault, so that I could bike to the festival site from the command center and pay business managers of groups who refused to let their musicians go on stage.
I had this vision of Pete Townsend sitting on these Who amplifier cases, swinging his legs back and forth, holding his guitar, waiting for Wolf to tell him it was okay to play because he'd gotten all the money.
That's why I do not like The Who, because I was at that meeting, you know. How could you not want to play? How could you risk a riot because you won't go on, you know? When these are the people that gave you everything that you have. You know, they love you, and you're going to hold them up for a couple of bucks.
Hendrix was the only act that was booked to play twice, and he was the most expensive, he was the highest paid act, $35,000. Hendrix circled the festival for 2 days. We were unable to get him in.
What I remember is being in the trailer and getting a phone call from one of the local little airports. And it was from Hendrix. And he was at the airport and he wanted to know if we could pick him up. And I tried to explain to him that it was really complicated. And I said, there's just no way I can do that. Is there anything you can do, he said. I really want to get there. And I said, well, is there anybody around that you might be able to talk into driving you out here? And he said he saw there was a station wagon, hang on, clunk. And then he came back, yeah, I think I got that covered. And I'll be there soon, click. And 2 hours later or something like that, down the little road behind the stage, there's a Ford Falcon and a station wagon, light blue Ford Falcon. Stops, and Jimi Hendrix, in full Jimi Hendrixism, emerges from the car, and they unload his stuff, and that's how he got there. He flew in a private plane. He flew in some kind of small plane, and he paid some kids to drive him to the show. And I mean, I remember that happening, but so much stuff was going on that it seemed really difficult to relate to at the time.
It looks like we're going to get a little bit of rain, so you better cover up.
Woodstock and rain, Woodstock and rain, Woodstock and rain. I mean, they're all the same thing in my mind. The thunderstorm, tornado, whatever it was that blew through when Cocker was performing, scared the living daylights out of us. I mean, a whole bunch of things happened at one time.
Well, the winds were whipping up, and they were whipping these canvas things that they had tied up. And so guys were, it was kind of like a ship in a, suddenly a storm coming on, and the guys quickly, furling the sails and stuff. I mean, guys were scrambling around trying to cover amps and take down things that were in danger of being blown away.
It was getting a little dangerous in that John Morris had jumped on the microphone, and he was a big hero then because he sort of calmed people down.
The towers, which were scaffolding towers, had 4 or 6 Super Trooper follow spots, which weigh somewhere 500-600 pounds apiece, on top of them. And because of the wind, the damn things were swaying. And those follow spots were moving back and forth, and they were not chained down. And it's one of those things we forgot. The immediate concern was to get people away from the towers. And all of a sudden, I've got this mic and I'm saying, move away from the towers. It'll be okay, everybody just hang on, we're gonna ride this through, we've been through everything else.
Please come down off those towers, gentlemen.
The real answer is, I don't know what else I could have done. Somebody had to relay, somebody had to talk to all of those people. We had some kind of symbiotic relationship at that point, and you couldn't walk out on it.
And then I remember the sun came out and there was this incredible stench that came. You remember that? There was this stench. And it was very uncomfortable for people. And there was debris all over and everything. And people were sliding around in this mud and sort of like caking themselves up in mud. And all of a sudden the mud became an activity.
The New York Times, the Daily News, hippies mired in mud. You know, I didn't see hippies mired in mud. I saw it rained and there was a lot of mud and people having a good time.
And the light at that point was down in the sky and the clouds were overhead. And it was, everybody was silhouetted. So when you look, you know, you see the people up close, you were all kind of backlighted and silhouetted.
The rain created something that nothing else could have done. And what it did was it equalized everybody at that festival. Everybody was full of mud. Everybody was wet. Everybody was cold. Everybody was together. Everybody experienced the same thing at the same time and had to make it work. So I don't know how many people have told you that, but I thank the Lord for that rain.
Without a unifying factor like that, it could have been particularly difficult to try and take a small city of 400 and perhaps close to 56,000 people and allow them, right, to coexist for that period of time. Music went continuously. You know, where did you eat? Where did you shit? Where did you sleep? No, it didn't seem to bother anybody.
John Morris called the telephone building in White Lake, which was our headquarters, and spoke to Joel and told Joel that we had a rather nasty and potentially dangerous problem, that the crowd was scraping the dirt off the power lines that had been buried in the ground, and the rain had washed away some of that dirt, and there was some concern that unless we could divert the power, that there would be an accident.
What I have in mind, he said, is to work a bypass around the area that I'm worried about, and that will take me some time. But when I heard how much time it would take him, it didn't seem that dangerous. I mean, he said he could probably do it in a matter of minutes, and it wasn't hours or days. And we agreed that that was the way to proceed.
On the face of it, one would have said, well, let's stop everything until we divert the power, which was our suggestion, but John advised us that The Who or the Grateful Dead or one of the groups most keenly awaited by the audience was just coming on stage after a rather lengthy wait, and that the crowd was restive and they'd been rained on and they were angry, and that another delay of 45 minutes or an hour or whatever it would take might lead to violence. So we had a decision to make. Could we divert the power and keep it on at the same time and run the risk in the next 45 minutes there might be some calamity, or should we shut it down and invite an immediate calamity? So we went for the potential calamity rather than the sure calamity. And so Joel and I conferred, and we decided that we would take the risk of leaving it on and diverting it, and that worked, fortunately.
They're like massive little tiny snapshots of events. There's the stage is sinking, the stage is sinking. You see, everybody would get up, want to be on stage. I mean, it was really cool. So everybody wanted to be up on stage. There reached a point after the rains that the stage literally started sliding down the hill. So they'd throw everybody off stage so there'd be less people on stage and they could save the stage.
People started leaving on Sunday evening. It was supposed to be over at midnight tops, maybe 11 o'clock or something, but it went all night long, Sunday night. Jimi Hendrix, for whatever reason he had, wanted to close the festival. Being that it was at night and people leaving, you had really no idea how many people were going to be left when dawn came up. And as that gray dawn came up, there was Jimi Hendrix in this resplendent white outfit with fringes on it. And being an incredible Jimi Hendrix fan myself, I wasn't going to miss that performance. Just seeing the people wandering off slowly in this, you know, sort of surrealistic scene, and hearing the Star-Spangled Banner played in the manner that it was played, that's the way the festival ended for me. But there was a lot of work to do after that, but I kind of forgot about it at that moment, you know. I just took it in, smoked a joint, and relished in it, and said, we did it.
You'd see people wandering around amidst all these old blankets and paper and lumps of stuff, you know, laying around, and people walking around picking through it and kind of scavenging through it.
It looked like a Civil War battlefield, you know, and those old photographic plates they took right after the battles, where you'd see dead bodies laying around and all the equipment that they left behind. And the other amazing thing was there was a tremendous smell that, of course, you can't get from the movies or the pictures or anything. It was a horrible, rancid odor rising from all this muddy debris that had been left behind. I mean, and it went on for acres and acres.
I remained behind, and a lot of other folks did as well. Some of them were hog farmers who stayed for a couple of days to clean up, and some of them were simply folks who didn't want to leave. They wanted to stay there forever. They had put tents in the wood, they had built households, and of course had no means of maintaining their lives, no food, no water, no nothing, no services. We took damage claims from the neighbors, insurance claims, releases, complaints, and it just went on and on and on for weeks and weeks and weeks.
A lot of the piping just got buried, and the electric got left, and the phone company came, took all the phones away, and the poles got taken down that they were mounted on, and the boards, and everything just kind of went back to normal slowly.
I knew that what they had done what we had done to the ground was nothing couldn't come back, because they stayed, cleaned everything up, and then replanted it, which is an agreement they had with Yasgur.
If you were technically oriented, and we're used to a level deck, right, and life as you dreamed it might be, if you went through those 3 days, it would have totally destroyed your concept of order.
We knew we were in the middle of a financial disaster. We knew that some things had gone on that we could never make right, and then we had begun to hear what turned out to be fabricated reports of dead bodies in the woods around the festival site.
Jim Mitchell told me that there were bodies all over the site, amongst the trash, because that's what it was. It was a gigantic dump site at that point. And we were charged with finding the dead bodies.
I was at the bank in New York talking to a bunch of panicked and angry bankers. And Jim Mitchell, who had been charged with cleaning up the site, called me at the bank and said, they're going through the woods. My crew is going through the woods and they're finding bodies. And I said, find out the details for me. And he called back about an hour later and said, I was mistaken, there is one death They found one body, and apparently he was accidentally run over by the machine that was compacting and gathering the trash. And it was pretty emotional. Joel and I were both at the bank, and it felt like our world had sort of collapsed. And then this information that this boy had been killed accidentally at the site felt like the last straw, and I remember feeling pretty broken up about it.
John had really gone way over his credit line, and the local manager of the local bank was so distraught. We were afraid he was going to commit suicide because he extended so much credit to us. And we had people coming in to saying, I have 10 acres here, and people have been tromping all over it and staying in it, and we'd say, what kind of crops did you have? By the time we got through, we knew how to estimate an acre of alfalfa or corn or something like that. We're paying them off.
I spent a good bit of time for the next number of weeks coordinating what cleanup activity was going on at that time, returning people's lost property. There were a lot of wallets, purses, things, and we had a lost and found, and we sent stuff back out in the mails. We took damage claims from the neighbors, insurance claims, releases, complaints, and it just went on and on and on for weeks and weeks and weeks.
John was in a situation where he had gotten himself into doing something and behaved at all times as an absolute gentleman, looked at his options, knew he was done, and said, we're going to go through this. We're going to take care of it. And after the festival, the same thing with the debts. He could have gone bankrupt, gone belly up. The whole thing could have been over. He could have walked away from it. He chose to make sure that absolutely everybody got paid. A lot of respect for him.
I believe that. I mean, that was something my father felt strongly about, was that you can regain lost monies, but lost reputations are forever.
It cost us $3 million, and it was particularly expensive because we didn't have $3 million at the time. When it was over, we were $1.5 million in debt or more, and no real prospect for repaying it. It worked out that we were able to, but it took us quite a long time.
We'd spent well in excess of $1 million over the receipts. The newspaper accounts of Woodstock the morning after were not friendly. Times that headlined it Nightmare in the Catskills. We had bankers and creditors and just about everybody breathing down our necks that morning. And when the smoke cleared Monday morning, the bank said, my God, we've paid out well in excess of $1 million over the original $250,000. And we have no documentation to support it.
One of the bankers picked up our folder, I remember, and in an attempt to emphasize the points he was making, and he was making points about how irresponsible and stupid we were, he began to slam the folder on the table. And in so doing, out popped some of the papers from this manila folder, and one of the papers was the personal guarantee form, obligating John and me to whatever debts we had rung up over the weekend by writing all these bad checks. And the guarantee form was unsigned. Just evident, you could see that the signature part of it was blank. And this fellow stopped in mid-tirade, and everybody at the table looked down at this form and looked at each other, and John and I looked at each other. It was such a wonderful moment, especially because it was the period of time that Monday morning was such a leaden period.
And we said, naively perhaps, but we said it, well, it was our intention to honor these debts, and we'll sign whatever papers you ask us to sign to memorialize that.
And I'm not sure that legally we could have done anything other than just honor that commitment, that obligation. But it did make the bankers a lot friendlier right at that moment.
Michael and I have a very interesting relationship. We can't be too close, but we can't really be too far because we had a child together. You know, and that was Woodstock.
I left the site, I guess, around noon on Monday. And John and Joel, I guess, had left the night before, and Artie had left early that morning. And as I was leaving, they were in Wall Street. They were in a meeting in a bank, and I got a phone call that said you had to come down right away. And one of the last helicopters was just leaving, and the guy offered me a lift. And it was the first time I'd never seen it from the air, and I thought, you know, what a great idea to see it from the air. And there were 50 or 60 kids left on the field, and they were collecting garbage. And I remember as the helicopter took off, I saw that they were dragging the garbage in bags and old clothes, and they were piling them in this huge peace symbol in the middle of the field. And that was the last image I had as we left. That was the first time I'd seen it from the air, and that was the image that stays with me always, is that that's what was left at the end of it.
I mean, it was the seminal experience in my life. It was a major factor. Would I like to go do it again? Yeah, it won't be the same, but it was fascinating. I would love to walk on a stage and say, get off the towers. It's not a free concert, and I quit if anybody gives a good goddamn, and call it done.
It happened because of the good vibes in planning it. It happened because of the dedication of everybody that worked on it. It happened because of the weather. It happened because all these variables came together. The time was right. Everybody agreed, the music, the piece, everything was just perfect for that.
When the festival was over and all this trouble came down, the dead boy, the lawsuits, the pillorying in the press, the loss of money, the Yasgurs were steadfast friends. They didn't call and say, you didn't clean up this acre or that acre, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. They called up and said, look, anything we can do to help, we'd love to help. We did clean up their land. And Max called me, about a month after the festival, and he said, you know, I can't imagine what you're going through. I mean, I know you're only 24 years old. You must be having a nightmare of a time. He said, I've got a great idea. He said, why don't you come up here for a month and milk cows? He said, and no one has to know where you are. He said, you get in good shape, you'll get tired, you go to bed at night, you'll sleep well, you can forget about Woodstock for a month. I almost took him up on it, but I'd met a girl, and I was 24, and my romance took precedence over milking cows, but I married her too.
Well, I don't think you can plan to have a Woodstock if by that you mean a spontaneous mass gathering of tremendous energy and goodwill at which people have a great time. I think you can offer it. You can set the framework up for it, but having it happen is it's a miracle.
Let me tell you this. Didn't matter how I went into it and came out of it. Didn't matter how anybody else came into it and went out of it. We wouldn't be having this conversation today if it didn't mean something to millions and millions of people who weren't even there. We wouldn't be standing here with this camera and these questions, and you wouldn't be making a film unless this thing historically meant something to a lot of people above and beyond what it meant for those people who were there, and above and beyond anybody's what they brought to it or brought away from it. It's a singular event in history.
So that what was learned at White Lake was not that hundreds of thousands of people can paralyze an area and break the law, but that in an emergency at least, people of all ages are capable of compassion. And while such a spectacle may never happen again, it has recorded the growing proportions of this youthful culture in the mind of adult America. Walter?
And that's the way it is, Monday, August 18th, 1969.